my name is Brianna, and I'm going to be going over some best practices on recording your podcast either at home or in a studio like I'm in here today. If you're recording your podcast from home, you want to make sure that you have a nice quiet area. So not the living room, not the kitchen. You want to make sure that you're in a quiet area that has a door that you can kind of go to and get away from where all the noise is happening. Another thing that you want to make sure of is that the room isn't too big. The smaller the room, the better. And you might even see some celebrities that have been recording in their closets, definitely because the more stuff you have around you and the smaller of the space is going to help with the sound dampening and make that recording sound even better. Once you've selected the area that you're going to record your podcast from inside your house or your apartment, you want to make sure that the microphone that you're using is in a stable location. You have a solid table. You don't want any sounds coming from the microphone being hit or rocking. That will definitely distract the listener while you're recording. And then it might actually even distract you as you're recording it and you're really trying to get into the podcast itself. So you don't want to be distracted by noises and things. So make sure you have a flat table, a sturdy table, make sure that you have a really good mic stand and the microphone itself is locked in its location. And for another best practice in terms of how to use the microphone is kind of like I'm demonstrating here today, is you want to be less than a fistful away from the microphone. That's where you're going to capture the best sound. And actually, you'll be able to hear this as I tilt this way. The sound is going to go away. It's not going to sound as well. If I'm turning this way and I'm looking to somebody, you again can hear that the sound is dropping. The same exact thing for if I pull away from the microphone, it's not going to sound as crisp and clear and dedicated as when I'm sitting right here on top of the microphone. Another best practice for recording your podcast at home is understanding how sound works. Sound travels and bounces. So when I'm speaking, my voice is going to ricochet off of the walls. It's going to ricochet off the ceiling. If I'm looking up, sound waves travel and then they reflect back once they hit a solid surface. So you'll see in a lot of recording studios, if there's glass, it's 45-degree tilted glass. So that way the sound shoots down. Obviously, we won't have those in our home recording setups. So the best ideas that we can give you here is foam panels. They kind of look like egg crates, and putting those around if you have a room that you can dedicate to recording your podcast, that would be great. We also have sound panels. Those are a next step up, a little bit more expensive, but again, a little bit more boisterous and being able to take sound waves in and then hold them inside so they're not reflective. If you're working with a space that has to double duty as another room and you can't afford to put up permanent fixtures, there are plenty of ways that you can still make sure that you're getting good sound and dampening the sound waves. We've seen people hang up jackets, rugs, coats, blankets around them that are not in the frame of shot. So that way, again, you're kind of creating that sound barrier. And another practice that you may have seen a lot, but you're not always understanding of why someone is doing that. At concerts, at shows, a lot of the times the artists and the musicians will stand on top of rugs, standing on them because your sound is, man, I almost had it. Standing on top of it because your body vibrates as well. And just adding to the layers of the room that you're in is going to help you get that better sounding audio, less echoey, more in control and focused sounding audio for your podcast. If you're going to be recording from home, you want to make sure that you're in a quiet, secluded location within there. So not the living room, not the kitchen where you're going to have, other people or animals tramping through. You want to make sure that you're in a nice, quiet location. And with that, the smaller the room that you can be in, it's the best for audio. So you'll see a lot of times celebrities are now recording in their closets, even though their closets are actually kind of big. But it's really the best for audio because you're surrounded by fabric and cloth, and that helps with the sound. But then also because the rooms themselves are of the smaller spaces within your house or your apartment. So whatever room you go to, just try to make it one of the rooms that are not beside the busy areas. And then also make sure that you can have a door to shut and seclude. So that's going to be the best for capturing the audio. Another best practice for getting the best sounding audio at home is making sure that your table and mic setup are done properly. So your table, no wobbly tables. You want to make sure you have a nice solid structure and that your microphone has a nice mic stand like this one does here. Also, a cage is really nice because it's not going to wobble. And if it does, the sound is not going to travel through. So you can see this cage has these wires that suspends the microphone itself in the middle. So even if I did happen to hit this, it's not going to mess up the microphone. Whatever setup you have at home, have a good table, have a good sturdy setup, have a nice mic stand. I would invest. None of this stuff is too expensive, but it's very important to make sure that from the start, you're investing in all the right things. So make sure that your microphone is set up properly. And then once you're there and you have your mic, another thing we want to talk about is how to capture the best audio once you start recording. So as you can see and as you can hear, that once I start to turn away from the microphone, my voice is going to drift and it's not going to sound as crisp and as clear as it does when I'm sitting right on top of the microphone. That would be also true of whatever chair you're using. Try not to have squeaky chairs that make a lot of noise. If you have a swivel chair, that's okay, but just recognize that the noises that are happening around you. So if you have a solid 4-legged chair, that's probably for the best. For best sounding audio, you want to make sure that you're about less than a fistful away from the microphone. As you can hear, if I start to sit back and get relaxed, it doesn't sound as good. You hear more of the room sound versus me in the microphone. Some other things you can do to help sound dampen the room is you can have foam panels, little square ones that look kind of like egg crates. If this is a room that you can kind of dedicate to your recording, you can put those on the walls. If you want to take it a step further, you can grab sound panels. They are a little bit more expensive, but again, they're built to capture waves, the waves that you get when you're speaking. They draw them in and then they keep them suspended inside there. So something good to recognize is that if I were to be in a room with 4 walls and nothing on them, the sound waves would bounce off of the walls and come back. And it's not anything that is too intense, but you hear it too when you're in an empty room. When you move into something for the first time and it's empty, you hear the echo. It's exactly like that if you were to be capturing it on a microphone. So you want to make sure that the room that you're in has some sound dampening, whether it's the panels, it's little foam panels, or if you don't have any of those things, or maybe this room has to double up as another room and you can't dedicate it to be a podcast recording room. Something that we've seen really work well is that people will suspend and hang up coats, blankets, rugs outside of the frame of view of camera if you're doing that, because that's another way for sound to hit something and kind of get absorbed rather than it being reflected back into the microphone. So these things will make it so that way you can have some really great sounding audio at home, but we would be remiss not to tell you that there are podcast studios, kind of like the one I'm in here today. This is Gotham Podcast Studio, located in Midtown in New York City. There are podcast studios all across the country, typically in the more city environment areas, and they're popping up more and more. So if you're looking for a studio to kind of handle some of those elements that we talked about here today for you, you would walk in and they would have a system like this, set up microphones for you and engineer to record your cover art or our logo in the background like we have here today. All of this stuff is something that a really good podcast studio would have set up for you. They should have the great mics, the great mic stands, the solid tables. And not only that they can provide you with coaching. And actually, they have a lot of services. Podcast studios typically have things like editing features, so they can help you with the editing of your audio. They can help with hosting and distribution, like Tandem. Any of these podcast studios that you may frequent, they may also have community features as well. So you could tap into learning more about other podcasters and having podcasters on your show. If you're recording from home and you have your setup all ready to go, you have your sound panels, you have your microphone, the next thing is getting connected with the guest. And we live in a virtual world today. So, you may have someone that you get to meet in person, But a lot of times you are going to be connected with them virtually. There are different programs that have different eases of use and very specific ways that they work. Some of our favorites for connecting easily to other guests are Zoom and Squadcast. Squadcast is definitely focused on the audio professional, and it's a little bit more robust in their services. Zoom is great because it's very easy to use. So if you're looking just to get connected with somebody, but also record that person locally, which recording locally just means that you're not recording them over the URL that you're sharing to get connected or over the internet. They're recording their audio in person, and then that's getting captured by Zoom, and that'll be sent to you after the recording is done. That is the same for Squadcast. You want to make sure that whatever program you're using records your guest locally versus over the program itself. One of the things I love most about podcasts is that typically it's not live. It's not a live TV show. It's not a YouTube where you're going live. You're recording this and then you're releasing it to the public later. That helps to take the stress off of the moment in that performative state. However, it's all about how you want to be branded and how you want to interact with your listeners. So if you do want more of that staring right into the camera, I'm talking to the listener, you want to make sure you have some of those performative features while you're interviewing a guest, while maybe you're doing a solo episode, whatever it is. I think understanding and knowing who you're trying to play to in terms of your guests and your listeners will definitely help you recording in the moment. If it's more you're inviting these people in to watch a conversation you've already had, then that's less performative in the moment. It's more conversational style, a little bit more relaxed. So whatever it is, the feeling and the vibe that you're going for your show, just trying to keep that in mind while you're actually recording it and capturing that audio. So far in your podcast recording journey, you've got your home setup going on, or you're at a studio, you've recorded the audio, and another step now is the editing portion. How do you get this audio that you've captured ready for publication? Editing can seem like a daunting task, but in actuality, there's very few steps to get your podcast ready. Yes, you can take it further and you can spend a lot of time editing. However, it doesn't take much to get your podcast from its raw state to ready for publication. I want to share with you some of our favorite free programs for editing. On your computers, you can download Audacity or GarageBand, and they're very user-friendly. So their interface is pretty easy to understand. There's keyboard shortcuts for you that you can look up, and that'll make your audio editing much simpler. So you'll take that audio file that you've gotten out of your program that you used to record. You'll put that into an editing program, something like Audacity or GarageBand, which are two free, very user-friendly programs to edit your audio. And once it's in there, you'll see that entire conversation you have is one long file. There's no multiple files or anything to get confused about. There's really just that one file that you're then going to edit. Once that file has been put in, you'll want to listen through one time, at least one time, completed as it is, and take some notes. Make sure you have a pen and paper handy. Take some notes, take some timestamps. And that's another great thing about these editing programs is they'll have very specific timestamps that you can get down to the milliseconds of when something is said. And if you are listening through and maybe you really don't want it to be so raw conversation, you want to have a typical format, you can then take the timestamp notes of when you want to remove something. If something was randomly said later that you want to put to the front, you can take those notes, and then after you've listened through, you can start the editing phase of clipping things out, removing things from the conversation. One important note to remember is that if you're taking multiple notes and you need to remove multiple sections, start from the back, meaning start with that last edit that you need to make and move your way forward in the file. Only because if you start at the beginning and you clip it, all of those other timestamps that you had written down have now shifted to other timestamps. If you start from the end and you clip out and then you move forward, all of those other ones will be at the times that you had originally written down. That's a little pro tip for you to make sure that you don't go through that phase of editing and then you wind up not knowing where those other clips are. So make sure you start from the end if you have multiple clips to cut out. After you have the conversation of the audio in a place that you're comfortable and happy with, the next step would be how you bookend it or how you start it. Do you have music? Do you have a standard intro? Do you have a file that you use every time, or do you change it up? Whatever it is for your show that you like to do, that's the time that you would put those files in. So you take your other file for your intro or your music and you put that into the editing program. You lay that in there and then you blend the two, which is very easy to do with the move key. You move the audio file to where you want it to start and where you want it to end. Both of these things can be done really easily. And then once you're done with that, that's when you're going to export your audio as an MP3. And that's when you'll get it ready for publication. Something that you may come across is that you need to put an ad into your episode. So whether you read the ad yourself and you have a separate file that you've recorded for that, or maybe you did a live read, meaning in the show itself, you took a natural break and pause and then you read the ad itself, or maybe the ad has been given to you by the sponsor. Whatever form of ad that you're getting, you're either going to put that ad at the beginning, at the end, or in the middle. So that's what we call the pre-roll, the post-roll, or the mid-roll. And your pre and post-roll are going to be very easily input into your audio file because kind of like your intro and outro, you just stick them at the bookends, right? The mid-roll is when it can seem a little bit more complicated if you're pulling a file that's been recorded in post or beforehand and it's not read in the moment. What you want to do with that audio file is listen through into about the middle of the episode and find a break in the audio that makes sense. It's kind of natural. Something that happens a lot is right before you go on to a new topic, like you just ended a topic and you're about to just start into that next one. That is when it's most natural to take a break. You put a slice in the audio file, you move the before and after pieces to the side, and then that's when you input that mid-roll ad. Now, we can definitely get a little bit more complicated if you're feeling like that's very simple. I got that part down. You can do blending. You could put music that fades in from the audio of the recording that then goes into the audio of the ad itself. And same thing for the post ad. You can have music that blends out and then goes seamlessly right back into the audio of the actual interview itself. It's up to you. I've known ads and listened to ads that are a little bit more like, and here's the ad. Sounds fine. Nothing wrong with that. And then obviously, as you get more comfortable with the audio editing programs, you can kind of work with them, test some things out, see what it sounds like to you. You're the best critic of what it sounds like before it gets put out into the world. If audio editing sounds a little too complicated or something that you don't want to spend your time doing, no worries. There are audio professionals typically that work at studios or freelancers that you can outsource your audio editing to. All you have to do is send them that file that you captured from recording at home. They edit it and typically get it back to you within 48 hours, completely ready for publication, that you can take that audio file and put it into your hosting company like Tandem. While recording at home can be very convenient, you can have a nice setup, you can do everything that we kind of talked about here today. There is also the option of going into a studio. Now, there are pros and cons, of course, but some of the great things about going into a studio is understanding that you're using their technology, that their setup is done properly, that they're monitoring the equipment. A lot of that can allow you to focus more of the content of your show than you being in charge of everything. So, a little bit of the pros and cons there is that when you come into a studio, typically there's an engineer, and an engineer will make sure that everything is set up, the mic checks are good, you get recorded in your audio and that the levels are correct. And then actually a lot of studios will also have editing services. I know at Gotham, there's an advanced editing service that you send the audio into, you tell them the notes of what you would like to see happen, and then they deliver it within typically like 48 hours. So you could get your audio back pretty quickly, edited and done for you. Now, pros and cons there is that gets done quickly, definitely an investment of your money, but time is money. So sometimes if it takes some work off of your shoulder and off of your plate and you get a really great sounding audio file, it may be worth it to you to invest in going to a studio and paying for advanced editing. Also, another amazing thing about being inside of a studio is the experience itself. You do feel a little bit like a rock star getting to walk into the studio. Everything is set up for you. Your cover art is displayed on the screen. And also, especially if you have a guest with you, it's so amazing to meet somewhere for this special occasion and record your audio. And then you get to leave here on a high, essentially, because you just had an amazing conversation, or maybe you had a really deep conversation, or you feel like that audio was captured correctly and you don't have to stress about setting everything up. The studio experience is one that I really recommend, and even if it's only for those really special occasions, because when you walk out of here, you know that everything has been handled and you get to go on to the next thing. There's a lot to do when it comes to your podcast. You might have to make some social media clips. You might have to run an ad. You might have a list of other things to get doing that day for it. Coming into the studio and knowing that they can handle the equipment setup, they work with you in the moment. Your engineer is typically behind a glass wall. You talk to them through the headphones. It's just an amazing experience, especially when it's done right. And when it's finished, you know that they're handling the editing for you. They're going to give you back a completed product. Really, we can't recommend the studio experience enough if you can afford it or if you're near one. However, it shouldn't take away from the fact that audio can absolutely be captured at home. You can stick to a constant and consistent release schedule by taking on some of these factors in your own apartment or home. Okay, so now we're going to introduce the dynamic of having someone else in the room with you, your guest, maybe your co-host, whatever it is. Today we have Mike Ortiz, the man, the CEO. He's in charge.
Woo! What's going on, everybody? Thanks, Brianna.
You're welcome. Yeah. So when you introduce another person into the room, into the dynamic, there are some things you're going to want to make sure you're setting up correctly. Obviously, you want them to have a similar setup to yours. Same microphone, mic stand, stuff like that, just for consistency of sound. Another thing is that people talk differently. And you're going to want to set the level specifically for that person. Maybe they're a little bit more boisterous. Maybe they have a very loud personality and, so you have to turn them down. Or maybe they're a little bit quieter and more mousy and you're going to have to turn them up. Whatever it is, you're looking for consistency in the waveforms. So that way your listener, they're not hearing something really loud and then they're struggling to try and hear something that's really quiet. You're really looking for consistency there. When you're introducing someone else into the dynamic of recording and you're at your home or your apartment, you might want to be a little bit more relaxed. And so you're on the couch, you're holding your microphones, or maybe you're going to be in a little bit more of a alert position like Mike and I are here today, and you're talking to the camera. Whatever it is, you're just going to want to make sure that you are talking in the direction. Mike is going to explain that a little bit more to us.
Yeah. So, through when you're talking to somebody, you're naturally going to go in that direction. So it's like if I'm talking to Brianna, the mic's it's kind of tilted to my right here, just because that's naturally where I'm going to go. If it's directly in front of me, I'm going to be like, oh, what's going on? And then you can't hear it. It's going to sound weird. So it's it's here or it's here. So you want to really make sure it's towards the direction of the person you're talking to, because that's where you're going to get the optimized audio. It'll sound the best that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. It can be hard with the tabletop microphones. If you're holding your microphone, you naturally can take that with you wherever you go. But on the tabletop microphones, you are going to want to position that in the way you want it kind of before you get recording. Because, this... that definitely makes some noise. Yeah. So if I know that I'm going to be playing it up to camera, but I want to also be talking to Mike, I'm going to put it a little bit here. So when I'm naturally looking here at the camera, it's straight on. But then when I want to talk to Mike, I'm going to just turn my head a little bit. So you're still getting that same great audio, but I'm positioning myself to talk to him, make eye contact, stuff like that.